Hi, I'm Mike Zagadlo, the Chief of Police here at Lewis University, and we're really excited to be welcoming students back and to get our residence halls and our academic buildings up and running again. And part of what we're hoping to see as our new students come onto campus and our returning students return to campus in a much different environment than what they're used to is to see as many faculty and staff and employees out walking the sidewalks, walking the hallways at the university, providing directions to students who are lost, helping students understand our new rules around social distancing and adhering to the flyer's promise, and understanding everything that we're doing to keep the community safe. So as part of that, I hope to discuss just briefly with you some tips and hints on how to have difficult conversations with students. So for instance, if you came across a student in the hallway that you had to interact with who maybe wasn't wearing a mask or wasn't maintaining social distance, what could be some of the methods for approaching those conversations? Because they can be a little awkward and they can be a little anxiety inducing. One of the things I find that when we try to engage in these conversations, which could be about all kinds of different stuff, whether someone's being disruptive in class or not attending, or maybe it's an RA confronting a party or a student struggling with personal problems or mental health concerns. Any one of these scenarios, having a conversation about that with a student can be a little bit anxiety inducing. So the hope is that we can have some tips, a little bit of a toolbox that will help us get through some of these challenging conversations. Now, what I've found in training police officers is that as you engage in these challenging conversations, what tends to happen is a struggle ensues between kind of your cognitive computer that's responsible for coming up with language and problem solving and doing all the thought processes related to having one of these conversations, and your visceral emotional response to the stimulus of being in an awkward conversation. So you get excited or anxious, and that visceral, that kind of biologically programmed flight or fight response can interfere with your computer and your ability to create language, problem solve, to listen, to be attentive to what's going on around you. So one of the techniques we use to try to balance this struggle between the cognitive and the visceral self is to try to mitigate those physiological stress responses that naturally follow from having a conversation, a difficult conversation, or even a confrontation with someone. And those physiological stress responses are typically linked to your heart rate. So the higher your heart rate goes, the more likely you are to experience these physiological stress responses. And when you get up into the real high heart rate area, you're really excited, you tend to not be a very clear thinker at that point, because your biology is telling you, as you get more fearful or angry or excited, that you're less likely to need to remember a quadratic equation or be able to write a song. Those parts of your brains shut off and your more animal brain kind of takes over. So if we can keep the heart rate down, we mitigate these physiological stress responses. Unfortunately, we can't directly control our heart rate. But what we can control is our breathing, and that's directly connected to your heart rate. So if you can slow your breathing, which you are able to control, you're generally able to lower your heart rate. So my recommendation is that as you get into a situation where you have to have a tough conversation with someone, before you have that conversation, you take a deep breath and hold it in for a couple seconds, and then let that breath out. And that's going to result in your heart rate coming down. And as that heart rate comes down, your cognitive computer is going to be able to come back online, and it's going to help you be able to form a clear sentence. Remember some of your tips for having these conversations. It's going to help you listen better to what that person is saying, and do those kind of cognitive tasks that'll be useful to you in those conversations. So what I'm hoping to provide you with today is a very brief toolkit. And we have this handout, which I'll email out to you and you'll have available, which is a guide for gaining cooperation. And these are going to be out in all the classrooms. We put this together. But basically, it's 10 steps that will help kind of jumpstart you having a tough conversation, if that's necessary, with a student. We always want to begin by identifying ourselves and what we do on campus. So I'm Professor Smith from the biology department, or I'm Mike Zagadlo with the police department. Keep it personal. Don't get real hung up on your title. When I introduce myself to parents and students, I don't say I'm Mike Zagadlo, Chief of Police. I say I'm Mike with the police department. And that automatically personalizes this experience and kind of slows things down a bit and creates a connection. Invite a conversation. So instead of saying, hey, you come here, try something more like, hey, can I talk with you for a second? I'm Mike with the police department. Do you mind if I talk with you a second? Invite them in an interrogative way to have a conversation with you. That gives them a little bit more control, and it helps to show that you're not asserting authority or you're trying to push anybody around. Let them know the reason for why you're initiating this conversation. You know, the reason I'm talking to you today is because we have these social distancing parameters in place, and I noticed you weren't wearing a mask, and when you're indoors and you're on your way into class, we'd like to see everybody have a mask on. So that kind of lays the groundwork. Instead of saying, hey, you put your mask on, you're introducing yourself, you're making a personal connection, you're just explaining, hey, here's what's going on. And then it sometimes helps to ask if there's a reason why the person is doing what you don't want them to do. So I noticed you weren't wearing a mask. Is there any reason you're not wearing a mask? You know, perhaps this is someone who has a medical exemption or some other reason, or they just forgot it, or they have their mask in their bag and they forgot to take it out. And then you can work with them to help solve the problem. So if it's, I forgot my mask today, you can say, oh, well, we've got some down the hall in the chemistry office. I'll go grab you one. Come on with me, and we can solve that. For the most part, you know, 99% of people are going to comply with a request through this approach. You might run into a few difficult people who need a little bit of extra encouragement. What tends to work in that case is to begin to empathize and explain why you're doing what you're doing. So instead of asserting your authority or saying, look, you just put your mask on and do what you're told, try instead, you know, I understand the mask is uncomfortable. I really don't even like wearing mine, but we're all working together as a community to try to keep campus open and keep this experience great for everyone. So if you wear your mask and I wear my mask, that allows us to keep the campus open and continue to do the kind of unique education that we're able to accomplish here. Most people, when you just explain to them why you're asking them to do a thing, will do the thing you're asking them to do. There's a pretty narrow group that won't comply with you once you get to that point. If you're still not getting to the point where you're getting compliance, you can explain what the options are. And we want to do this in a non-threatening way. So you can say, for instance, look, this really isn't a big deal. I want to get back to teaching class. You probably want to get back to doing your homework. I'd appreciate you just putting on a mask. If you don't do that, I'm going to have to make a referral to student conduct. That's going to turn into a situation that you don't want, that I don't want, and it's just not going to be good for either of us. So the easiest thing to do right now is just put your mask on, and we can both go about our business and we'll be fine. Again, every time you put another one of these steps in, you're getting closer and closer to 100% of people are going to go along with this. There's a very rare group of people who are not going to comply with you when you use this kind of approach. And then the last thing you're going to do is just to confirm, before you have to take that next step of making a referral or take an action, is there anything else I can do that'll get you to put on a mask? They may say, yeah, just shut up and I'll put on my mask. Okay, I'll shut up, you put on your mask. It's a win-win in that case. And then if you have run into one of those 0.1% of people who are not gonna comply with you when you use this model, it's at that point that you're going to disengage and say, okay, I've tried to work with you, but I'm just going to refer this to student conduct. I wish we could have worked this out more easily. And don't fight it. Don't physically try to put the mask on them. Don't call 911 and get the police over there. Do the best you can with what you got, and then move along onto whatever comes next. A couple of phrases that I like to use when I'm working with people in these challenging conversations. That helps to calm things down. And these are good things to have in your toolbox. Like I mentioned before, instead of, hey, you, come over here. Excuse me, can I talk to you a second? Well, what can I do to help? Look, for your safety and for mine, we all want to wear a mask. So these kinds of diffusing, problem solving, telling somebody they're a reasonable person, that appeals to, to kind of the ego in a way. Look, I can tell you're a smart person, you're a reasonable person, you understand why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. And if you work with me on this, we're going to be able to keep campus open longer and get done what we need to get done. As I mentioned several times, a difficult person might always tell you no right out of the gate, but after you explain it to them, after you use these steps, 9 out of 10 people are going to get with the program and work with you if you can approach it in a non-threatening, cooperative way. The last thing I'll leave you with is some things to don't say to people when you're having these conversations. So don't be directive. Hey, you come here. Don't tell people to calm down. If you've ever been told to calm down, you know how it feels to be told to calm down. It implies that you're out of control or that you're not calm, and that is upsetting to people. So telling people to calm down never calms them down. I'm not going to tell you again. That is a threat, and it requires you to have a response to that threat. So if you tell somebody, I'm not going to tell you again, and then they do it or they don't comply, what's your next step? Don't paint yourself into a corner like that. You need to be more reasonable. That's similar to calm down. It's a criticism of that person's behavior, and you're telling that person right now they're being unreasonable, and people don't like to hear that. Telling people because those are the rules. We can explain the rule. We can explain why the rule is there, but not taking the time to do that and just saying it is what it is, these are the rules, that tells people that they're not worth the time for you to take to explain what's going on. Don't ask people what their problem is, and don't say, man, what do you want me to do about it? That telegraphs that you don't really care. So if you can use the tools that I told you and avoid these things that we put here on the end, we will generally be able to work with people and get them to work with us to accomplish our common goals. We don't want to insult people because that strengthens resistance, and civility weakens resistance. So be nice to people, be calm, be welcoming, be inviting, and have these difficult conversations in ways that are easy to be resolved. Thanks, and we hope to see you all out there.